Hey guys, we've got the Lenovo ThinkPad P53 here today. So this clip is just aimed to give you an idea what it's like to use, how it compares to the P52 and any other comments. We'll close the lid and take a look at the laptop. So exterior, one of the first things you'll notice is just how reassuringly solid it feels. 2.5 kilo for the non-touchscreen and 3 kilo for the touchscreen. It's really sturdy. Some marks over time will appear on the edge, but I think that's to be expected. No more hassle for battery on the base, so I think some people might find this to be a slight shock, but I think that's something else. We'll talk about storage and upgradability later because that's actually quite complex. As you can see, P53 on top, HDMI port has been moved to the left-hand side, if you can see. So also more ports on the left, generally speaking, SD card and etc. So on the right, P53 on top, again, just to remind, you have the SIM card tray, so that's quite useful. Also USB 3.1 port now. What has been dropped is a mini display port, but I think that's been probably inevitable for a while. On the inside, it looks really familiar to the P52. Not much has changed. So the screen, we have the 300 nit matte Full HD IPS screen, really good for indoors. There's going to be a brighter Full HD matte screen, 500 nits. That one is Dolby HDR, so quite a bit nicer. Surprisingly, that one is not much more costly. Of course, if you prefer 4K, there's two options, either the matte or the glossy. The glossy is the OLED multi-touch screen. The OLED one is quite gorgeous in the color range. Probably want to calibrate the color on that one. Both of the 4K seems to be a little bit more expensive. The bezel is quite noticeable. Personally, I focus on the content as opposed to what's around it. Of course, it would be really nice to have a thin bezel around the screen. Personally, I really prefer to have something where I can swap the screen easily if needed. Because if you think of Dell 5540 Precision Line or the XPS 15, to replace the display, the whole assembly has to go. That's quite wasteful. By comparison, this one, you can still swap it. Its function is quite important in a workstation. If you look quite closely, this webcam privacy shutter, it's a little bit tricky to use, but it's good it's there. Full cover to the IR webcam version as well. On the keyboard, so that's, I really like the feel of it. If you're coming from Mac, you're in for quite a treat. The trackpad, quite responsive touch. I really like that. Some people say it could be a little bit bigger, perhaps yes. I imagine many ThinkPad users would have reliable external mouse and a fingerprint sensor on some models. Dolby Atmos is now visible. The speaker seems really similar to the P52. Can't notice much difference to the previous generation. Of course, not as much bass as you want. So a business laptop, it just works and you can always plug in headphone or external speakers. Not all P53 are made the same. So what we mean by that is you finally have the support for Quadro 3000, 4000, 5000 series. So those cards traditionally have been reserved for bigger 17.3 inch body. Really exciting. There are Max-Q cards for the higher end ones. But on the base model, you actually have a different machine. So the motherboard is different for the T series as it is to the RTX Quadros. So the RTX Quadro have 3 of the M2 slots, and whereas the base range still has a 2.5 inch slot and M2 drives. So different motherboard, and so that has quite interesting effects. So if you do go for the RTX, you will have a bigger power 230 watts charger as well. The heat pipe for the RTX model is a little bit better than before in terms of cooling. We have the i7 here. We also have the option of i5, so that's 4 cores. Can go all the way up to i9 with 8 cores. Obviously, the Xeon only goes up to 6, but you have the ECC memory support. It'd be interesting to see if the AMD makes their way into the P series this year, because at the moment the i9 is still quite expensive. So if you want the performance, you can have it, but it's really, the price is definitely there. So RAM, we have a very modest configuration here. So 16 gig. You can go all the way up to 128, which is massive. And so that's 4 sticks of 32. Very modest 512 SSD here and Wi-Fi 6. If you want the 4G, you will need to configure at the beginning. So all in all, it's quite an interesting platform in that the T series Quadro seems like a revised P52S version, whereas the P53 with any RTX Quadro seems like a quite a different product if you're willing to pay. Okay, so with the P53, it's actually quite an intriguing product in that it created a new higher-end niche for the Quadro 4000 and 5000 series. That's really interesting. What would be also interesting when you make a decision when it comes to what spec is consider if you actually need the graphics. If you need 3000, 4000, 5000. If you don't, then a refurb P52 with the P3200 graphics might actually be quite a sensible choice, because people would suggest something similar, for instance, the XPS 15, so more stylish design, thinner, lighter, thinner bezel as well, possibly better speaker. But, that's quite a different machine. The machine that matches the Dell will be the X1 or P1 Extreme from Lenovo, the second gen. Of course, the Lenovo's version goes up to T1000. So the best way to think of the P53, perhaps, then, is that it gives you the option to get the 3000, 4000, 5000 cards if you really need it. If you don't quite need it, then obviously there are other options. I think unlike before, you can load up a P53 with ridiculous costs. So think OLED screen, i9, 128 gig of RAM, and all the other rest of it. At some point, that pushes the budget into almost Apple territory. Not quite, but whereas I think the better question is, what do you actually need it to do, and what's the minimum spec you can get away with for the next few years? I think having the option to have higher spec is great. Be sensible and define something that you want to go with. The 5000 series, because it's the first one to appear on this generation, it might, the next generation might have higher performance. It might gradually come down in price in the refurb market. So that's something to think about. Also, the other thing is, if you use this laptop, you'll probably have a docking station. It's probably worthwhile asking yourself, do you need the P73 instead? I mean, that's a slightly bigger machine, and but the screen just feels a little bit larger. Maybe that's easier on the eyes. Anyway, if there's any question, just drop it down in the comments. We're happy to answer if there's anything we can help with. It's okay? Thank you. Give us a subscribe if you can. That would really help. Thanks.